Thank you to the National Association for Primary Education for their long-term support of the Education on Fire podcast. To get a free e-copy of their professional journal, Primary First, please go to nape.org.uk/journal. That's nape.org.uk/journal. Hello, my name is Mark Taylor and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast. The place for creative and inspiring learning from around the world. Listen to teachers, parents and mentors share how they are supporting children to live their best authentic life and are proving to be a guiding light to us all. Hello, welcome back to the Education on Fire podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Dyslexia Awareness, and I'm going to be chatting to Aimee Cave, who is SENDCO at Pocklington Junior School in Yorkshire. We're going to be talking about this new amalgamation, really, of obviously the personal, getting to know the children within your school and understanding their needs, but also how companies are coming together to really support this process. And one of the companies that she's been working with is a company called Lexplore that can quickly analyse the key reading components and gain a detailed insight into how reading abilities varies when pupils process text across different levels. And I think some of this information, together with the personal understanding of the child, is really going to help us support many, many more children in their school learning. Now, I'd just like to thank everybody that's been involved in the GoFundMe campaign so far, where we're bringing together lots of these fantastic resources and information and wisdom from the people being interviewed on the show to bring them into a child-friendly book that we can create and gift to the children in our lives. If you'd like to find out more or to donate, please go to educationonfire.com/book, and that will give you all the details and all the information. That's educationonfire.com/book. But here we are talking to Aimee Cave about Dyslexia Awareness. Hello, Aimee. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Education on Fire podcast. Dyslexia is something which we've not really covered here before, and I think it's going to be really important for people listening, both in terms of if it's their expertise, but also just how it fits in with their classroom and their education professionalism as well. So great to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Let's start with where that specialism came in terms of your expertise and how you sort of dealing with these things on a daily basis.
So I'm a SENDCO in a school in East Yorkshire. I've been a SENDCO actually for only just over 4 years, but in that time I have, I guess, worked hard to develop my knowledge and my expertise, and done a few bits and pieces to keep my hand in. And dyslexia is one of the things I'm really interested in, as with any additional need, really. And it's something that, like I say, I've worked on to become knowledgeable in. And I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I certainly feel that I have enough knowledge to be able to support children in my school successfully.
Tell us a little bit about your experience in terms of the diagnosis of that, or the understanding of that now as opposed to maybe when you started out. It seems to me that it's very much more on people's radars. It's something which people are much more aware of and able to support children at a younger age, rather than the stories you hear from sort of many years back when people sort of entered university and then suddenly realised that there was something which was much more unhelpful in terms of their learning experience.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, if I think back to sort of when I was at school, that, you know, and sort of my teenage years and that sort of thing, dyslexia, I don't really remember hearing about it or knowing about it as such. And I know over the years it's been in the press. I know there's still people, obviously, that question dyslexia, which, for me, I just think is abhorrently wrong, really. I can clearly see children all the time that I work with day in, day out who are dyslexic or who have dyslexic tendencies, but I think over the more recent years, and certainly while I've been SENDCO, it's definitely, like you say, come into the forefront of people's minds more so, and I think that's really sort of down to work from really, really great companies, charities such as the British Dyslexia Association, who I just think are excellent, and other people of the same sort of ilk, really. And I think that then has brought it onto people's radars, things like Dyslexia Awareness Week and Dyslexia Awareness Month, which we're in at the moment. And I think those things have brought it forward, made people more aware of it. And then I think if you've got in school sort of conscientious SENCOs who are really keen on supporting children, I say that actually, but I think everyone who is a SENCO is a conscientious SENCO. I think probably a better way to say it is SENCOs who have the time, because that's always an issue, I think, in schools. Those SENCOs that have the time to be able to look at dyslexia and upskill themselves, upskill their staff, support the children, means that we are sort of really starting to help those children and get the support that they need. Because if they don't, like when we're talking back in the years where it wasn't really a thing or it wasn't really known of, there can be real problems for children then throughout the rest of their school life if they're not supported correctly, leading to all sorts of issues that stem from the dyslexia. And then obviously in later life, looking at careers and sort of the ability to read and write successfully. So it's really, really important, and I'm glad it is coming to the forefront.
And tell me a little bit about your experience of what it looks like when you understand and you can see a child struggling, because it's not a question of you have dyslexia or you don't have dyslexia, is it? That there's the personality, and a thing I think which is so important about the whole SENCO within the education system is it brings every child much more into the personal learning and support that they need, which I believe every child should have. But I think certainly in this area, it starts to give that individualization, which is the way that we can support more and more people.
Absolutely. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there. Every single child needs to have individual personalised support. That's absolutely my sort of theory, as it were, as a SENCO. My tagline is what they need is what they get with the children. And I think when you're looking at a child with dyslexia or dyslexic tendencies, or what you suspect may be that, it's a real case of unpicking what that looks like, because there are lots of neurodiverse conditions and other conditions too, or difficulties is probably a better way of saying it, that can present themselves in similar ways, really. And so I think as SENCOs, it's really important that we unpick that. Now, we're not experts; we're coordinators of an area, and I guess our sort of thing is that we just want the best for the children. So it's important, I think, that we have the right tools to be able to help unpick that to the best of our ability. And then once we've unpicked it a little bit, it's then obviously passed on to the experts who then can diagnose. In my experience, I would say getting to know the child is the most important thing, because if you get to know the child, you can start to unpick those difficulties and where they are. And then obviously, if it is looking like a dyslexic tendency or possible diagnosis of dyslexia, then you can sort of pick that up and take that forward, really.
Yeah, and I remember having an interview with somebody a few months back, and they were talking about their own experience with their daughter having dyslexia, and what they found amazingly interesting is that they actually didn't pick it up until she started secondary school, because she just had this amazing ability and awareness to be able to learn things because she could remember them and she could recall things, and she managed to kind of almost trick the system, as it were, until she got to a point where that was no longer possible because there was just too much work and too much detail. So it really is a difficult task, isn't it? But like you say, when you understand the child, then you could probably start to pick those sorts of things up.
It really, really is. And do you know what? That's a huge issue. What you've just mentioned about the person that you knew, that masking tendency, that I think there's a little bit, especially as children get older, a little bit of embarrassment, perhaps, if they're struggling to read and write, and their peers can, obviously, I know it's more than just the reading and writing side of things, but as an example, and if children's peers can do that, and they're maybe masking or hiding that because they obviously don't want to be embarrassed or don't want to be seen as they can't do something. And that is a real issue if it's not addressed until secondary school, when it becomes overwhelming, and that's when it sort of becomes found out, as it were, that we've gone all that time with all those missed opportunities and all that missed learning, and the realistic chance that child is going to be far behind where they need to be. It's absolutely a huge issue, and like I say, the amount of The amount of stories I hear about that, where a child hasn't been diagnosed till secondary school, or it hasn't been looked at till secondary school. I just think it's absolutely terrifying, really, and that's why it's so important that we do get early diagnosis in, we do get early intervention in, because if we can do that, then moving forward, those children are going to have a so much less stressful, more enjoyable journey throughout school. That a lot of children with dyslexia, if it hasn't been found out or it's been found out late, they don't enjoy school, because why would you enjoy coming to school if you found it so difficult? And I think what's the most annoying thing about it is actually supporting dyslexia. You can make such small changes, but they have the biggest difference. And I think that's what's so frustrating, because if you could really easily if you knew about it, you could easily make these changes and just make such a difference for these children.
And just take us into that a little bit, both in terms of, I think what you said about the awareness week and the awareness month is key, because there's an assumption sometimes that people are already aware, but we're just talking about it at this time. But let's unpick both of those things. First of all, in terms of if you are aware, or you want to think that you'd like to understand it a little bit more so you could pick this up, what does it look like in terms of where you think a child might have dyslexia or where they're struggling? And then also what you just mentioned then in terms of what are some of those things that you can do that makes a big difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like you say, the awareness thing is the awareness weeks brings it to the forefront of people's minds, but it's actually about being aware of it all the time. I sort of made the mistake, really, I think, when I first started out as SENDCO, that everybody was aware of these things, and actually you chat to so many SENDCOs maybe who aren't, and that's not their fault, or teachers as well. That's not their fault. That's because I'm gonna at the risk of being a bit political. There's so little training for teachers and SENDCOs on special educational needs. It's a huge issue. And I remember, I trained to be a teacher, 15 years ago, I think now. And I remember we had half a day on SEN, and that's to cover the whole of SEN. There's no way in a morning I can equip myself to have not even a basic knowledge or understanding of SEN, and that's before you've even gone into the specifics such as dyslexia. So I think the awareness week and months, that sort of thing, really bring it to the forefront of people's minds. But like you say, it needs to be something that's going on all the time and promoted for dyslexia and for any other difficulty that a child faces, autism, ADHD, all those sorts of things, so that we can, do something about it, really. I think looking at a child, if we're concerned that, or we want to know if they have dyslexic tendencies or are going to be diagnosed with dyslexia, obviously we always look at the reading and writing. That's always the big one, and it's all they can't read and write, or they have difficulties with reading and writing, or they have difficulties with spelling. That absolutely is a huge part of it. The whole, they got their B's and their D's the wrong way around and that sort of thing. Huge part of it, absolutely, but there's so much more to dyslexia as well. There's a lot around working memory, a huge amount around organisation. Quite often you sort of, when you're looking at dyslexia, you're looking at that the child can do lots of other things really, really well, but it's those areas such as working memory, organisation, the reading and the spelling and the writing, that's where their difficulty lies. So that's where you can sort of, it can be more identifiable, if that makes sense. The issue comes when you've got other things going on, or you're looking at, say, for example, organisation. If the child's got difficulties with organisation, there are also lots of other things that that is a symptom of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, it's like what I say, it's getting to know that individual child. Once you've then sort of started to pick up those things, then obviously you can look forward. What I would say is there's some great infographics out there, which I use all the time in my school. And if a child has dyslexia, we pop in there, if they're, say, for example, on our SEN register, we pop the infographic in their file, so that any person working with that child knows it's not just reading and writing that can be the difficulty, because that's always the one that makes me bang my head against a brick wall. And they're, like I say, they're really useful, and you can find those all over the spot. And the BDA, like I mentioned them before, they have some great resources on signs of dyslexia. Once then, obviously, you have identified that a child has dyslexia and they've been diagnosed, or the problem that we have is it's obviously quite difficult to get a diagnosis. Different areas have different processes. In my area, for example, educational psychologists no longer diagnose dyslexia. There's nobody really in the authority to do that. So as a school, you're looking at either bringing in a private assessment or asking the parent to go to a private assessment. There are funding for these assessments, but obviously, that's not always possible. So what I always try to say is, look, if we think it is that, and we've done enough digging in school to find that out, then we would support that child as if they were dyslexic, whether they have a diagnosis or not. And then I think that's really important because, if you have a dyslexia-friendly classroom, you are no way going to affect, it's not going to have a negative effect on anyone. If you're supporting a child in a dyslexia-friendly way, it's not going to have a negative effect on them. It's only going to have a positive effect. So you certainly can't do any harm there. And I would suggest, it's just there's obviously interventions can be a huge part of that are specific to supporting dyslexia. But, there's really simple things that you can do. Like I said, is there a lot of glare on the paper as a result of the dyslexia? Do they have visual stress? Rather than having white paper, need it to be on a certain colour, which you can buy really cheap visual stress screeners for that. You can get more in-depth ones too that are done sort of like properly through a specialist, but you can get a really good idea in a school yourself. You can, have an overlay. You can change the font so you've got a dyslexia-friendly font. You can change your spacing between your words. Really, really simple things that will support this child and make the hugest difference. That will literally, take you 2 minutes to do. And I think actually, what would be a really, really good thing is making every classroom in every school dyslexia friendly. And then regardless of whether you've got masking tendencies or not going on, you are supporting the children.
Yeah, I love that. And I think also just being aware that every person is different. And
absolutely.
And if you have a dyslexic tendency, then that makes you different than someone who doesn't. But it's all relative, and it is just part of who you are. It's, if someone is tall, then they're going to be able to reach something on the top shelf that someone small isn't. So therefore, you're going to have something in your classroom that would help that. and it seems to me that it's the same sort of thing. If someone struggles to read in this particular way for whatever reason that is, then you can put things in place to help them do that. And that's where I guess we're going full circle now in terms of that kind of individualized learning, because everyone needs something different. And when you realize that it's not I've got X, therefore I can't do Y, it's just I understand more about myself and my skills and my strengths and my focuses and what I can do to help myself. And therefore, by doing it in a different way, like I said, with all those tools that you just talked about, therefore that's going to help me do what I want to do. And then that just feels like it's part of your life and you're adapting it to make it the best you possibly can, which is, in reality, is what we're all doing all the time based on our own strengths and limitations.
Absolutely. I realise you can't see me, but I'm nodding and smiling here because that's absolutely my ethos, Like I said, right at the beginning, knowing every individual child and what they need and making it personal. And like you say, it is not about the fact that, we're talking about diagnosed with dyslexia or has difficulties in this, but actually there's so many strengths to these, to dyslexia, to autism, to ADHD. It's just a different way of thinking. And I think we've got this, we do have, in general, as in society, this terrible notion that I'm normal and you're not because you've got dyslexia or you use a wheelchair or you have ADHD. And it's wrong because that's not the case. These neurodiverse difficulties or anything like that actually are huge. There's huge strengths to these things. And it's just often it's a different way of seeing the world, or, somebody being dyslexic being more creative, for example, than, somebody who's not. I think there's, without all of these different, as we call them, difficulties, which they're not, we wouldn't have such a diverse society creating such wonderful things. So I think you're absolutely right there.
Yeah, and of course we set ourselves up for this, don't we, in terms of everyone has to do everything in the same way at the same sort of time, which is just a nonsense in so many different ways, because I think having the option to explore things is fantastic, because we all need to have experiences to know where our strengths are, and then, of course, the natural selection of everything is you then go towards what is your strength. That isn't to say you completely negate the things maybe you're not so good at, but you understand where it fits in your interests and your abilities, expertise, and then you gravitate towards what's going to support you in your life. And I think having that framework to begin with is such a different starting point. We're going to certainly go down a rabbit hole there, which we'll be here all day about, I'm sure. So
Absolutely. And wouldn't it be boring if we were all the same?
exactly. And you mentioned ADHD there. I understand you were the first friendly ADHD friendly school in Yorkshire. What is that, and how did that come about?
Yeah, that's right. We've been working with the ADHD Foundation, who I can't recommend highly enough. They are the go-to experts, I guess, with ADHD, and we took part in their pledges. I think off the top of my head, I can't remember. There was 6 or 7 now, but that's sort of 6 or 7 pledges that we said we would absolutely follow in order to become an ADHD-friendly school, and we had to obviously evidence that as well. We did a lovely little video with lots of children saying all sorts of things about ADHD and showing the things that we do for them in school. And actually what that started with, bizarrely enough, not bizarrely enough, but interestingly enough, based on what we're chatting about, is whole staff training. And that is training everyone on ADHD, from your teaching staff to your teaching assistants to your lunchtime supervisors to your admin team to your caretaker, so that everyone had that knowledge of ADHD and how to support that if they came across a child with ADHD in school. And then obviously the other pledges as well that we had to evidence. And I just think that's hugely important, because now we've got a really good awareness in school of what that looks like. And it comes back to what we're saying about dyslexia. If everyone's got that awareness, then, just look at the difference that you can make.
Yeah, absolutely. So give a shout out to your school while we're talking about that, and then you can take us into sort of how your sort of professional expertise takes you beyond just that individual place.
Absolutely. So we're Pocklington Junior School, like I say, based in Pocklington, which is just outside of York, in East Yorkshire, and great school. Absolutely love working there. And they've got, we've got a really great bunch of kids and a really great bunch of staff and a really great bunch of parents, and I think we make a great team. So hello to everyone at my school.
Fantastic. So outside of the school, how does your professional support and consultancy work in terms of that sort of holding multiple balls in the air, I guess?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I'm really in my infancy with my consultancy. I've only started that sort of just over a year ago, and I was full-time as SENDCO in my school. I've now taken that alongside a teaching commitment in school. I'm now just doing the SENDCO part, which is my non-teaching commitment, and I use the other 2 days a week to do consultancy work. So part of that has been doing things like webinars, training, that sort of thing. I've been trained in sort of delivering SEN reviews to other schools through Whole School SEND, which is a great website and team that are building on SEND in schools and trying to improve that. So that's sort of a part of it. And then the other part of it is a company called Lexplore, who actually link obviously really well with the dyslexia side of things. They are a reading it's a reading assessment tool using artificial intelligence, and I work with them. They actually have, the way I know Lexplore is I actually bought Lexplore into my school and was so enamored with what it's done in my school, and how it's supported children and how it's helped identify reading difficulties, that then I've actually ended up doing some consultancy work with them as well and supporting them in sort of that sort of thing, delivering webinars, giving advice as a SENDCO from a SENDCO point of view and that sort of thing.
And we'll make sure that we've got links to all of these things on the show notes. So do go and check that out wherever you're listening to this podcast. You can click through onto the show notes, and we'll have direct links through there, so you can explore all those things in much greater detail. You talked before about your experience as a child in terms of dyslexia and your awareness of all these sorts of things, but take us back a little bit into exactly what your school experience was like, and any sort of teachers or things which really had a big impact on you.
So I was thinking about this actually, and for me, the teachers, I can name a few teachers that had the biggest impact on me at school, and for me, it's always those teachers that, the ones that made a difference, the ones that you can remember. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
The ones who did something different, who went the extra mile, or just made you feel special, I guess. I remember, I think, if I'm thinking about my favourite teacher throughout the whole of my time at school, was a teacher called Mr. Cowan, and he actually taught me English literature when I was doing my A-levels, and Mr. Cowan had the reputation for being the scariest teacher in school. And when I found out that I had him, I thought, I mean, I was, like I say, 16 at the time, so it wasn't like I was young, but I was thinking, oh my goodness, I've got Mr. Cowan for English. This is going to be a horrendous 2 years. And then I remember being taught by him, and he was just the greatest guy, and he just absolutely went the extra mile. But he had this whole sort of this fearful reputation, because if you didn't teach him, I think if he wasn't your teacher, you got sent to him if you'd done something wrong, and he would, absolutely go off on one at you, I guess. But then actually when you were in his class, he was absolutely brilliant. And I remember one time we had this boy got sent to him who was much younger in the school, and the look of fear on this boy's face as he came in and got told off. And the boy then got told off, walked out of the classroom, and I can never forget the moment. He just turned around, looked at the A-level group, and just went to us, "Remember, kids, order through fear." And I just never ever forget that, which actually, when you think about it, isn't the way you want to teach at all. And he certainly wasn't like that as a teacher. He was absolutely brilliant. And like I say, went that extra mile. But that was always, it did amuse me, and still to this day, I remember it.
Yeah, and it is interesting, isn't it? People's perspectives of teachers before you get into that class, or you have them in a lesson, and often it's not reality, because you hear the stories from people who have a different life experience of you. Like I say, if it's a subject that you like and you get a lot out of it, then your experience can be very different. It's just if you kind of either personality rubs up the wrong way, or you're not be able to put the work in, or just want to push those boundaries a little bit, then certain people have certain ways of reacting to that.
Definitely.
What was the best piece of advice you've ever been given, and can you remember who gave it to you?
Do you know, it's a really trivial piece of advice, but it's always stuck with me. And if we're looking at a teaching point of view, is sort of where I've gone with this. And it was when I was training to be a teacher. I did what was the old GTP, which is the Graduate Teacher Programme. So it's very similar to the Schools Direct programme that goes on now, the old-fashioned version of that, seeing as we're talking 15 years ago. And the guy who led the program, who was in charge of it all, I remember him talking to us one day. We used to have these sort of conference things that went on, and the piece of advice he gave, like I say, was the most trivial thing, but it has always stuck with me, and it has always worked for me. And that's, as soon as you get a job as a teacher, make sure everything that you need doing for the following week is completed by the Friday of the week that you're on now. And it always, for some reason, just stuck in my head. And I've always lived by that mentality. And I'm sure there's some teachers going, "Oh, that's impossible. I hate that." But it's been a huge part of what I've always done for the last 15 years. And like I say, has always worked for me. And it's meant that actually I've been able to achieve that work-life balance. So when, I've maybe stayed a bit later on that week to get stuff done, or worked it through lunches and breaks and whatever, but it's meant that I've actually been able to have that weekend to reset and relax. And then going forward on a Monday, it's a whole new week. And yeah, don't get me wrong, you get a whole barrage of things then thrown at you that week, but you feel much more refreshed and relaxed. So I've always really tried to live by that. And like I say, it's not the most inspirational piece of advice, but it's certainly one that's always stuck with me.
Well, I think also if it's something which you feel the benefit from every week, then it's fantastic. And it's along the same lines as I hear a lot about, kind of, finish your day in a way that sets you up for the next day, so you're not chasing your tail the next morning, whether that's to do with school and teaching or any part of your life, but it just kind of, you compartmentalize what you need, you set yourself up, you get yourself ready, and I think all of those things, there's something about the energy that goes with that, as well as the physical time and the practicalities that you need, and like you said, part of me thought, if you're sort of working through breaking lunch or late, but then if you know that the payoff of that is that you get your weekend to yourself, and you have the ability to be able to, like you say, that sort of balance or harmony, as it were, you sort of know exactly what you're getting because of what you've done, then that's perfect, isn't it? Because you really are taking control, and I think that's what many teachers feel like they really don't have.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think in this day and age, there is so much being thrown at us, and so much red tape and paperwork and new government initiatives, and trying to fit 47 lessons into one day, that actually trying to have that sort of efficiency, or just like you say, that being rigorous with yourself and completing things and compartmentalizing, it can really help.
Yeah. And what advice would you give your younger self, do you think, now?
Probably the same advice that a lot of people give themselves, and I think that's don't worry so much about what people think, because when you're over 30, you won't care.
Yeah. That's true, and it's interesting, as a father with teenage girls, that's quite a big, quite a big statement because you're absolutely right. But it's the thing which kind of runs into our household quite a lot in terms of, you can say it makes such a massive difference when you're younger, and I think understanding that, even if it's really hard to perceive, I think is really important because, like you say, as time goes on, you really start to get a much different perspective of that.
Definitely you do.
Um, and is there a resource that's had a really big impact on your life? And it could be a podcast, a book, a video, film, song, anything, but something which really sticks in your mind.
Do you know what? I'm going really, really curveball on this, and I think that I'm sure some people will say some really inspirational things and some fantastic educational resources, and I'm going to go. I'm going to step away from that. And for me, the book that has had the biggest impact, you're going to laugh when I say this, the book that's had the biggest impact on my life is Nigel Mansell's Autobiography. And you will absolutely laugh. I'm sure you're laughing in the background at me saying this, but
With you
I
there,
read
with you.
I read that when my dad's a huge racing fan. He races cars himself, so I've always had that drilled into me. It's not random, and I've always Nigel Mansell was my era, my youth, the 90s,
Yeah,
late
absolutely.
80s, early 90s, and when his autobiography came out, and I read that, and I was only young when I read it, but it really taught me about determination, and some of the things that he did to get to where he was, because his ultimate dream was to become a Formula One racing driver, and he worked 3 jobs. He broke his back and he got back into it. He pushed his car over the line when it broke down. He never ever gave up. And to read about that at such a young age, I was probably like, I don't know, maybe 12 or something like that at the time, just really resonated with me. And ever since, I've always sort of tried to think back to that mentality, that not give up mentality. So it's a bit of a random one, but that's certainly what has done it for me.
No, I love it, and I think it is that connection again, which is the important thing. I remember. I mean, it's interesting talking about dyslexia and reading and all of that as part of this show. Is that I remember my experience of reading when I was younger, and the sorts of things you read at school, and the sort of the schemes and the format you kind of go on, and certainly then as a boy, as you're going through, you suddenly become aware that there's this whole world out there, which isn't about reading, but it's about the story, it's about the information, it's about the life, it's about something. And for me, a bit older than that, sort of later in my teens, I read Linford Christie's Autobiography, and it was that same sort of thing. It was that kind of, I wasn't even thinking I was reading all of a sudden. It was about the journey. It was about the things which impacted his life. It was how he became, this Olympic athlete. And I think there's something fantastic about the awareness that we all have as we grow up and and get older and start to come across books in a different way. And it's not about having to do something at school. It's not about having to do this or that. It's about understanding that you can learn and you can grow through that sort of interest. And like you say, for whatever reason, I started liking the idea that I was able to learn from other people, and autobiographies were one of those things.
Absolutely. And actually, when you were just chatting then, I was thinking, gosh, and isn't it absolutely terrifying and really, really sad that if a child, just going back to what we've originally been talking about, dyslexia, if a child has dyslexia and is masking and doesn't end up getting diagnosed, or isn't found out till much later, that in a way we very possibly could be taking that experience that we've had away from them, because I read that, like I say, when I was 12, you when you're a little bit older, and we've chosen to pick those books up and read them, and we've enjoyed them. And I'm sure I've got a huge love of books, and I'm really lucky because I'm fine with my reading, and always have been. But if we've got those children who have got difficulties with that, and we don't support that very early on, in primary school, in secondary school, by making those little changes, then they're not going to be able to possibly develop that. And actually, we're going to have the absolute opposite effect. They could end up completely turned off from reading. And I think that's why it's so important that we look into trying to diagnose and or trying to at least identify these difficulties as early as we can and get that early intervention in. And obviously, I mentioned earlier that I obviously do some consultancy work for a company called Lexplore. Lexplore are a great example of of supporting really a child with reading difficulties, because it's a really new technology. It uses eye tracking technology to identify reading fluency difficulties. And like I know you mentioned, obviously you'll pop the link up on the website, but it's great because actually Lexplore doesn't diagnose dyslexia, but it picks up reading difficulties early on. And if you're doing that assessment, if you use that in your school or a similar tool, obviously, that's the one that I use in my school and how I ended up, like I say, working for them. If you can do that sort of assessment every term, and you can start to pick up really early on from year one, or year two, year three, whatever, those difficulties, and then sort of implement strategies to go alongside that. Either Lexplore have packages to support that, or similarly other things like I even mentioned, the really simple free things that you can do, then we can so easily make a difference and then allow children and adults to have those fantastic experiences that we've had and we've learned from books.
I love it, and I think it's so important, and I think it's why these conversations are so full of value, and having your experience and your knowledge of all of this is something which really shines through when we're talking about it. And I think it's going to help so many people, and we're just giving them, the practical tools, which I think is incredibly important, because it's something I wasn't aware of, which is one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about it. But also, like you say, just having the awareness around dyslexia, having the awareness about what it is and how it affects children, and then, like you say, going into adults, and not just about a diagnosis, but about, I think, what we just finished on, which is absolutely perfect, that sense of what we're not giving them, or the opportunities or that to explore this entire world of literature in whichever format that happens to come. And I think if this conversation is just enabled one person just to kind of open that door a little bit, or support them in some way to help another child, then I think we've done what we needed to do today.
Absolutely, I agree. And like you say, just getting lost in a book, being inspired by a book, taking you to places that you've never been before is the most wonderful experience, in my opinion. It really is. And if we can, like you say, just one person can think, oh, well, I wonder if I've got dyslexia, or, oh, let me find out a bit more about that, and we can make a difference to one person, if not hopefully more, then it will really have made my day, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Aimee, thank you so much for joining me. It's been so insightful and such a fascinating conversation. And as we said, if we've helped one, but hopefully hundreds of people to be able to get something from this, then that'll be fantastic. So have a great day, and thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Education on Fire podcast. For more information of each episode and to get in touch, go to educationonfire.com. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.